everyone who has joined us, and thank you for joining this session of Local Talks. My name is Randy Karangizi, and today I will be co-hosting the event with Adil and Marlos, who are from Regenerative Collaborative. Our two platforms are collaborating today to bring to you a topic around sustainable education spaces, and we have been working together towards this event over the last few months. And we've invited two speakers who are here with us. We have John DeWitt and Meg Collin, and we will introduce them to you shortly. But before that, we thought it would be a good idea to share a bit more about who the two different platforms are, Local Talks and Regenerative Collaborative, as we have different attendees from our typical audiences joining us today. So I will begin, and then I'll hand over to Marlos to share about Regenerative Collaborative. This event is being recorded, and it will be uploaded to our YouTube channel, which we can share towards the end of the event, so anyone is welcome to watch it back later. Local Talks originates with Localworks, which was a design and build collaborative based in Uganda, specializing in ecological architecture and construction across East Africa. And it's been open since 2013. It's in Uganda. And it is our intention to redefine the ways buildings are built by working in multidisciplinary design environments that include architects, engineers, and craftsmen, builders, and essentially it's an interdisciplinary green building approach to sustainable construction. At the core of Localworks is really mitigating the climate crisis, and we do this through the use of local materials and essentially trying to create a highly contextual design solutions and comprehensive end-to-end services. So Localworks then set up the Localworks Foundation 10 years after its beginning. And the foundation is really the non-commercial arm of the platform. And it aims to address the significant knowledge and skills gap in the East African construction sector. It focuses in on two areas, which are research and education. And it aims to make a direct impact through practical research in sustainable materials and construction technologies, and also training builders, designers, and general public in green design and construction principles. So then Local Talks itself is part of the education arm of the foundation, and we've hosted a number of different events over the years. Most of them are hybrid, where we've had people within our office and also people online, as our speakers and audience members have now reached all across the world. And occasionally we also have hands-on workshops as well, where we take people to some of the sites that we're working on. That's a brief summary, thank you, of Local Talks. I will now hand over to Marlos to share about Regenerative Collaborative.
Great, thanks, Randy. So since my camera is not working for some reason, I quickly put in a picture so you know what I look like. My name is Marloes Reining, and I am one of the directors of the Regenerative Collaborative. I'm super excited that we're doing this event with Local Talks today. The Regenerative Collaborative, as the name says, it's a collaborative, so we'd like to collaborate with like-minded organizations in Africa to bring more knowledge to the market. The Regenerative Collaborative is a non-profit organization focused on transforming our built environment into a regenerative one. We promote strategies and approaches that bring regenerative design and construction to life. We work collectively to inspire, educate, and create awareness and contextualize regenerative built environment approaches to the South African context. And we'd like to expand to our African colleagues as well. We really make an effort to showcase local projects, local people, and local companies that are aligned with our goal, creating a regenerative future. We've been running the Regenerative Collaborative for the last, I think, since 2017. We were called slightly different a couple of years ago, but we're going strong as the Regenerative Collaborative now. We also put all our webinars online on YouTube. If you're interested in one of these topics, please go and have a look and follow us on our YouTube channel. Or if you have any ideas or if you have any projects that you want to showcase, let us know. We're very keen to get it onto our platform, onto one of our webinars. Normally, our webinars are the last Thursday of the month. But because of this collaboration, we're doing one today, and then we're doing one next week as well, which is also Africa-centered. So that's a really nice one, and we'll share details about that just now. If you want to follow the collaborative, we're on Eventbrite, which is our registration platform. We're on LinkedIn and on YouTube, so you can find us there and be up to date with all the events that we're organizing. But at the moment, it's monthly webinars that we facilitate. Let me just mention it quickly. So next week, Thursday, we're doing a webinar on African perspectives. Localtalks will also putting a speaker up there, and we have 5 expert speakers from the African continent, from Ghana, Namibia, Uganda, and Botswana, all talking about what's happening in their country regarding regenerative buildings or a sustainable future. Cool.
All right, thank you, Marlos, and it's also great to be able to collaborate with you today and hopefully more going forward. So we will now shift into the topic. We will have 2 presentations, and then following that, we'll have a Q&A session. So everyone can save their questions for the end, and we'd encourage you to get involved in the conversation and unmute your mics and share your questions when we get to that point. So thank you both to Meg and John for joining us. We will start with Meg, and then we'll be followed by John. Reminder, the topic today is from classroom to campus, creating sustainable education spaces. So Meg is focused more on classroom and John on campus, not really, I guess both on both, but essentially, yes, they will have those separate presentations. So I will first introduce Meg. She'll give her presentation, and then John will be introduced a little bit later before he speaks. So Meg is a qualified architect with interdisciplinary experience in the public, private, and third sectors. She currently works in local government in the UK, working with multi-stakeholder groups to deliver green infrastructure and regeneration projects. As the primary researcher and co-author of the East African School Designs Guide, produced by the Fielden Foundation in partnership with Enable, Meg was instrumental in its development and launch in Kampala last year. She really enjoyed, I think, working alongside different architects, academics, and students in East Africa. She's lived in both Uganda and Egypt as well, and she's passionate about the integration of sustainable urbanism, green infrastructure in emerging economies. And she also chairs the Board of Trustees for Engineering Ministries UK, which is a British arm of global NGO dedicated to designing and constructing community serving facilities. So this is a short introduction of Meg. She might tell you more about herself as well. I will hand over to you, Meg. Go.
Thank you, Randy. Sorry, that was a bit of a long introduction, actually. So yeah, great to be here today. As Randy has said, I'm an architect, and it's really been my privilege and joy to be working on this project over the last few years, both researching and co-authoring the book on Schools Design Guide for East Africa through the Fielden Foundation. The Fielden Foundation is a charity based in the UK and Uganda, who has worked with partners on a number of school buildings and design guidance. Most recently, the Manifesto for Climate Responsive Design, which was published with Enable a few years ago, and then now the Schools Design Guide. East Africa is a beautiful and diverse region, and depending on exactly how you define it, it has countries ranging from Burundi to Somalia, a huge variety of cultures, tribes, and languages. It's a region with approximately 113 million school-age children, around half of its population. So what about the need for guidance on schools design? It's a region with rapidly growing population, particularly Uganda, as can be seen here comparing it with the UK. Uganda is in one of the top 10 countries worldwide for rates of population growth. And when we look across the region, there are similar patterns in other countries, although not identical. So what does that mean for schools? There are thousands of schools already built in Uganda, but just looking at a bit of data from this population curve, we can begin to estimate how many new schools will be required in the next 5 years if we're to come close to meeting Sustainable Development Goal 4, which is all about ensuring inclusive and equitable quality education and promoting lifelong learning opportunities for all. If you look to the right of the population curve, there are currently approximately 9.9 million primary school aged children in Uganda. An estimated 1.6 million are currently out of school. Due to population increases, we'll be expecting around another 2 million additional children in the school system in 5 years' time. And then if we think about the current class sizes of around 75, if they were reduced to 45, a more manageable number to be able to teach, that further increases the need. Putting all of these figures together, and we're looking at potentially around 170,000 new classrooms required in the next 5 years. And that is just for primary and just for Uganda. So you can imagine those numbers increasing if you also look at pre-primary and secondary and expand across different countries. Some of you might be looking at that number and thinking, well, yes, you need 170,000 classrooms, but what about the teachers? And to kind of summarize briefly, there are many components of a successful education. And without any scientific backing, I'm going to hazard a guess that at best, architecture is only 15% of either the problem or the solution. We also need to address issues such as a shortage of teachers, funding, social context. But what is notable is that these other issues may be more fluid. They have the potential to change rapidly. The built environment may be the only thing that lasts longer than a decade, and we'd hope it will last several. Not only that, but the built environment is extremely resource intensive, pouring billions of tons of carbon into the ground each year and using increasing amounts of power in operational use. So it is the built infrastructure that we focus on through this guide. But it's not just about the big numbers. The fieldwork period involved visiting over 40 schools in both Uganda and Rwanda. We took objective notes using standardized criteria and also spent time learning from staff and students in these schools. This helped us gain valuable insights into the challenges and opportunities that schools face. We saw examples of innovative and creative solutions, as well as how resource constraints can sometimes act as barriers. The range of schools was huge, and it included this remote single-stream community-funded school with classes from kindergarten to P7 in southwestern Uganda. Notable features of the infrastructure here were poor quality bricks, patchy shutters, no electricity or running water, and earth floors made with rubble in the corner. Students fetch water from the lake, which, although it's very beautiful, is around 40 meters away, and you can see there's a considerable drop. They use that to fill a hand washing container, and they have fairly rudimentary toilets that are essentially shacks with curtains. But I also visited some very well-resourced schools, such as this boarding school in northern Uganda, with the most incredible sports hall that you can see here being used for exams. But when you see the kitchen, which to those of you in East Africa may not be a surprise, it does make you wonder that if the walls of the kitchen look like this, what is it doing to the lungs of the people that work there? And not only that, but what about the carbon emissions from very inefficient wood-burning stoves that are left burning for hours and hours, also contributing to deforestation? So our aim for the guide is to address both kinds of schools, whether they face basic resource challenges or need to improve their efficiency and sustainability. We do this by offering designs that are achievable on a restricted budget and which can be built without high technical expertise, hoping to mostly capitalise on local labour. We're aiming to improve quality through master planning, landscape, and internal comfort, among other things. This is just to show you a brief timeline of where we are today. There have been several phases of research, which have included studying the national design codes, NGO guidelines, international standards. We've met with government ministers. There have been a couple of design projects, and we did a 2-day workshop at the University of Rwanda, which was particularly important for testing out the emerging principles of schools design with those who had most recently gone through the education system. And extremely excitingly, tomorrow at a conference hosted by Enable, an innovation festival, the physical copies of the guide will be available for the first time. So those of you who are in Kampala, do get yourself down to the festival if you can. And I think I saw Frank from Enable on the call. Frank, do post something in the chat on that if you can. From the beginning, it has been a work of collaboration, and I'm immensely grateful for all the partners who shared their knowledge and expertise freely. I recently heard that the difference between cooperation and collaboration is that cooperation is working together towards different goals, and collaboration is working together towards the same goal. And I have to say, it has been one of the highlights of my professional life to work with so many organisations who all had the same goal of improving school infrastructure in East Africa. I'm going to share a bit about the contents of the guide, although I would encourage you to download it. It's available for free on the web, and I will put a link in the chat afterwards. But to start with, we present 8 principles of schools design, and these are not necessarily exhaustive, but we do think they cover off the most important features. We start by looking at the school as a place to provide holistic, child-centred education. Schools are learning communities, and they need to provide a safe and secure setting to support the intellectual and social development of each child. Secondly, schools should be designed to be future-proofed as far as possible, and to include options for adaptability and flexibility. There were some examples we saw where new stories were added during the school holidays, or where suddenly new buildings had to be put up within just 2 or 3 years of the school opening because of the increase in numbers. And so as far as possible, this should be anticipated through design. Schools should be the heart of their community, and they will often provide a child with their first experience of a community beyond home and family. It becomes their introduction to the wider world, and school facilities can offer so much more to the community than just the school, but they can also be a space for play and recreation and community events. Schools must be designed for inclusivity and those with special needs, and this is a core part of Sustainable Development Goal 4. There should be equal access for all staff and pupils as far as possible, particularly those with special educational and physical needs. Schools should be designed to mitigate and respond to climate change, also referred to as climatic responsive design. East Africa has a relatively benign climate, so well-designed buildings should require very little heating or cooling, providing that these strategies are followed. And the aim, of course, is to reduce our embodied and operational carbon, but also to improve comfort in the face of changing climate. Schools should respect landscape, nature, and biodiversity. And we saw some fantastic examples of schools where they had really integrated landscape so that it was not only the space between the buildings, but it provides a learning environment, an outdoor classroom, and improves the facilities at a relatively low cost. And some of the local work schools that we saw were particularly good examples of these. Nearly at the end. Schools should be designed to minimise maintenance and running costs. As I'm sure many of you will be aware, the maintenance budgets for schools are often absolutely tiny. And certainly last time I looked at the figures, the annual payment to a school per primary school student in Uganda is around $5, which needs to cover everything other than the teacher's salary. So there simply is not funding available for maintenance, and that has to be a key driver of design. And then the final principle is about providing high standards of health and hygiene. So this should include a clean water supply, easy to maintain sanitary facilities, and these need to be planned in really from the very start of the guide. of the school. And just to walk you through some of the pages, that we've got an introduction which talks a bit about who the guide is for. So we hope that it will offer something for both design professionals and contractors, for policymakers, for students, and for school stakeholders. There's other pieces of guidance within that section. We look at site planning, which I think is one of the areas that architects can add the most value. We might be able to agree on a few more standardized building types, but certainly thinking about how those building types fit into the site is an exercise that needs to be really thought through, looking at the topography, orientation, services, access, other elements like that. We look at the different elements of a school from preschool up to vocational, including some of the really important aspects like accessibility and inclusion, which the government of Uganda highlights as really important, but in reality, it's often difficult to execute well. There's a section on landscape, written primarily by our collaborators, grant associates, and this talks about food production, biodiversity, water management, play and cooling, and really how to maximise the space between the buildings to increase the value of the school for students, staff, and the environment. We look at materials and construction, lots of this section written by Localworks. Following rapid urbanisation, there's a real recognition that more schools will need to be built multi-storey. This comes with its own challenges, but clearly uses up less land, which is really important. So there's some guidance on how to do this safely while also looking at low carbon materials. We look at environment and services. We're increasingly seeing solar used for power, sometimes water heating, and even as shown in this study here for timber drying. This section looks at other aspects of environmental services such as water and sanitation. And then perhaps the nicest part to read, at the end, we've got 13 different case studies, a range of exemplar schools from across the region, several of which are Localworks projects, and which I would really recommend visiting if you haven't already. So I'm just going to share a case study that I've been working on. Halfway through the fieldwork period, so back in April 23, the opportunity arose to design a vocational school for the charity Ignite Change based in Kamdini, and this was done in collaboration with EMI Uganda. Due to time and budget constraints, the aim was to apply the evolving principles of the school's design guide to the project in a light touch way that could be handed over to a technical engineer or site manager. Ignite Change are a fantastic charity. They support vulnerable people through skills training, community work, business support and advocacy. And so our brief was to design a 3-phase vocational training school on the Gulu-Kampala highway that include business outlets to ensure an economically sustainable operation. So I'll briefly walk through the design in the context of the 8 principles of schools design that I shared earlier. When it comes to holistic education, a vocational school is perhaps an easy example. But I wanted to talk a bit about the girl pictured here. I don't know if you can see my cursor, but this is 18-year-old Miriam, and she was raised as an orphan with her siblings by her elderly grandmother. After finishing primary school, she was unable to continue her education and faced a future that she felt was hopeless, being ridiculed by her peers. She was given a scholarship to the newly opened Vocational Training Institute, this one in Kamdini, and that's really transformed her futures, teaching her valuable skills which have increased her employability and enabled her to earn money to support her family and further her own education. So it's always a real privilege, I think, as an architect to see things that you've designed not only built, but actually to see them impacting the end users. And I think this project was a really great example of that. Secondly, design for adaptability and flexibility. As I said, we worked on a phased master plan with 3 phases. The first phase fairly small, but big enough to enable the school to open, so that they could then fundraise for later phases. So there were several different aspects to this, but one of it was designing a classroom block which could be used as both classrooms, lecture theatre, tailoring classes, IT, and then also used as a dormitory in early phases. Developing the school as the heart of its community. So you can see the site here, and a really important aspect of their whole business case was to have these business outlets, which we've put at the front of the site, including a restaurant, showrooms, car garage, and that is to provide a business outlet for the different aspects that the students are learning about, as well as a way of integrating into the community. Inclusivity and accessibility are very important, and these again is just sort of two small ways that includes physical accessibility but is not limited to that. So I've shown a couple of examples here, but there's more that could be said on that topic. The buildings were designed to be climate responsive, and I've just shown a couple of the different techniques that we've used here, very sort of well-known, simple and low-cost techniques. Integrating landscape, nature and biodiversity were very important. So there's space for sports, also space for social areas, for growing vegetables. And at the front of the site, which had been excavated in order to provide the marram for the road, it wasn't really suitable to be built on due to water issues, but it made a perfect site to turn into a public park. And that is part of the wider aspiration of the client. In terms of construction, the buildings have been designed to be constructed with interlocking soil stabilized bricks, ISSBs, which you may be familiar with. This is designed to reduce maintenance, particularly as they don't need to be plastered and painted, and that doesn't need to happen again every year. It's also because the school itself trains students in how to make and build with ISSBs. So they will be able to help construct future phases. And then in terms of health and hygiene, right at the start of the project, we were working with a civil engineer who was able to carry out some initial soil samples and ground investigations. And it's just really to say that it's really important to plan in the civils and civil infrastructure right from the start, even if much of it will not get built out until much later phases. So we completed the designs in June 2023, and the client moved quickly to start building, appointing a local engineer to do technical and permit drawings and to manage the project on site. The school opened for its first term in April 2024, and I was able to visit later that summer and meet some of the students. Like half of Ugandans, many students here never finish primary school, and so the ability to learn skills and increase their income is transformative. And as with any project of this size, there were many lessons learned. But firstly, I think that it is possible to do an outline design for a vocational school in 4 days when you have the full engagement of the design team, the client, and the prioritization of energy. Secondly, that planning for expansion and phasing is important, and that often means keeping a more fluid or hands-off approach to design for later phases. And thirdly, and perhaps most importantly, it was a good lesson that when your client is motivated and organised, they can get things built an awful lot faster in Uganda than you could ever hope for in the UK. I'm about to wrap up, and I know that time is running out. So East Africa covers a huge area, as I've mentioned already, with varying climate, socio-political contexts, governments and cultures. And so our guide aims to cover the general principles which should be applied to most settings. However, there will be a need for each country to write its own introduction, setting the scene, and to include its own addendum with local design codes, climate data, and case studies. We've completed the Ugandan addendum, but we're looking for partners to complete the other sections, and we're very much hoping to be able to work with them in that. The guide has also been translated into French, and that will be made available online when it is completed. And we're hugely grateful to Enable for their support in both the publishing of the guide and in its translation. We hope that as a result of that, it will be useful across an even greater region. One thing is certain, that there is no one-size-fits-all design. And in the guide, we've tried to present principles that we believe will work, including example classrooms and cross-sections. But we cannot pretend that the same school design will suit both downtown Kampala and rural Burundi. Each school faces a multitude of constraints, and there will never be a perfect solution, only pragmatic compromises. And I will finish it there and say thank you for listening, and I look forward to taking some questions at the end.
Right. Thank you very much, Meg, for that presentation. And it was really interesting to hear all that you had to share with us. And I'm also looking forward to the discussion towards the end of this event. I think I will now hand over to Marlos to introduce our second speaker. And then after John's presentation, we will come back for Q&A.
Great. Thanks, Randy.
No worries.
So I managed to get my camera working so you can see me now. That's great. So for the second speaker, we brought John DeWitt, who is an environmental sustainability manager at Stellenbosch University, where he leads the institution efforts to integrate sustainability into the campus operations, infrastructure and policy. He's got a background in environmental management and a passion for systems thinking. He plays a key role in shaping the university's journey towards a low-carbon, resource-efficient future. His work spans energy and water efficiency projects, sustainable mobility, waste reduction, and student engagement initiatives, which he will tell us all about today. And really making sure that sustainability becomes a living learning experience across the campus. So I'm going to hand over to you, John. Welcome. And I'm really looking forward to your presentation.
Thank you, Marloes, and good afternoon, everybody. I just want to congratulate Meg. I think she's doing excellent work in Africa, where she's designing stuff. We the opposite. We actually inherited campuses, and now we need to make it sustainable. So that's a different kettle of fish. Yeah, just to give you a brief background about Stellenbosch University, we're down in the Western Cape on the southern point of Africa. We've got 4 campuses. We've got quite a number of buildings, as you can see, 490 plus. We've got quite a big population of 40,000 students, including our staff, a GSM of gross square meters of 856,000, and we emit 101,000 tons of CO2 through our operations and learning per annum, which is quite a lot, and this is what we need to try and make sustainable. So just to give you a background on the journey of Stellenbosch University, around about 2010, we started with environmental sustainability, but it was really around biodiversity, conservation matters, landscapes, and also waste, minimizing our waste, and then also engagement and presentations that we've given to students and our staff members. Then we also started with utility work groups like electrical and energy work groups, as well as water work groups and waste work groups, where we actually used academics as well as service staff as well as students, where we sat around the table and we tried to learn from each other. Around about 2011, we actually started implementing energy meters, and we started with the awareness campaign as well. Then in 2015, everybody in the Western Cape knows about the big drought. That was really when there was a crisis and everything came together, and where environmental sustainability really started taking off at Stellenbosch University, and we could actually implement a lot of interventions. Then we wrote a sustainability plan and implement water meters in 2016. In 2019, we started with our first certifications of our buildings. That took up about 3 years just for 19 buildings to get certified as a first exercise. 2020, we wrote the environmental sustainability plan, which actually is now a guideline for the university for the next 5 years. And that was approved by our rectorate. Then in 21, we actually started with our solar plants. We also built a material recovery facility. And last 23, we really started doing an environmental sustainability system as well as our SDG systems. And then together also with load shedding in South Africa, we had to look at energy security for the campus. And then last year, we really started with a big drive where we actually installed solar, taking us to 2025 or to the present situation where we are now. So there are a lot of influencing factors on the moment in South Africa if you are looking at the university. So obviously we made some decisions and we want to be part of actually reducing the increase of temperature which results in climate change. And the second thing is we want to reduce our environmental impact as well as our resources. So external influencers are like, for instance, we have to report on our carbon emissions. We have to upload it onto websites. We do pay carbon tax. We have to provide the E part of ESG because we do get our research funds from the European Union as well as from the World Bank, and they're asking for these documents. Obviously, all the universities are ranked, and your SDGs actually makes up a big part of that. Our affiliations, especially with ICSN and ASHI, they actually push us for becoming more net zero and carbon neutral. And then obviously the utility cost and the resilience that you have to build into your program. And then obviously all of us in South Africa have to provide EPC certificates for buildings bigger than 2,000 square meters. So what we have done is we've taken all of this and we've actually packed it into a document, which is our guideline, and that is what we call our environmental sustainability plan. That includes your SDGs. It also includes our framework that we use on the right-hand side on top. And it also includes a little bit of our ESGs, which we've just started with. We've just done a gap analysis and that we will continue to do. So the tool that we use to see how good is the university doing environmentally is the greenhouse gas protocol, which we call the carbon footprint report. So we've done this since 2019, and although it actually went up a little bit, at least this year, 2024, it came down. So we're now at 100,000 tons CO2 equivalent, which is still very high. And that is what we need to bring down as close as possible to zero. So it's a tall order. So our plan is based on 8 elements plus two that we've recently added. The ones are water, it's energy, it is engagement, it is transport, waste, goods and services, and then buildings as well as travel and mobility. And then we've added climate change and we've also added indoor quality. Now, if I can just go, and I'm quickly going to run through them a little bit in detail. So our energy, why is that important? Because you can see on the right-hand side of the graph, although we actually use around about 70 gigawatt hours per annum, and it dropped a little bit because of load shedding, our cost is increasing, and that is because of the tariff increases that we get every year from the municipalities. And our energy is not, it is from a fossil fuel, from coal, which we buy from Eskom. So metering is important to start to manage it. The other part that we also do on the left-hand side, you can see that is we've got a big energy efficiency program where we replace all lights with LEDs. We've actually got a big LPG program that we're rolling out. We're actually moving to centralized cooling systems, big cooling systems. We've got a big program of PV solar that we're rolling out. We've recently installed 3.5 megawatts of PV, and we're going to roll out another 12 megawatts. And then we're actually building on all our 4 campuses, we're building microgrids inside the municipal grid. On water, there the cost of water actually did came down a little bit, but that is because of the tariffs and during the drought period. But we're using 2 swimming pools, Olympic swimming pools of water every day on campus. That is enormous. It's a lot of water. And so we've put in a lot of efficiencies, right from the students where the shower heads, as well as aerators on the taps, as well as toilets, we've changed to 6 liters. Even the washing machines, we changed to more efficient washing machines. We actually, one of our campuses, we've taken off municipal water. So we're using the lake that is on the right-hand side. We put that water through an RO plant, and that whole campus runs on water from the RO plant. And we do the same on one of our farms where we've got one borehole. Also put that water through a filtration plant, and that whole farm is running from borehole water. The other campuses, we're still putting in schemes so that we can actually reduce the amount of potable water that we use. And then obviously we've put in some grey water plants as well to help flush the toilets. On waste, I'm not going to go too much into this, but we've basically, for everything that you get, we've actually created a stream. So most of the stuff that's recyclable, we do recycle, or we send it to the recycle people. Our diversion rate on the moment on the big campus, Stellenbosch campus, is around about 80% on the moment away from landfill, and 2 of the other campuses already above 90% diversion. We continuously try and to manage materials that's not recyclable, to manage that out of our system, and that the vendors and students and staff can't bring it onto campus. So hopefully by the end of this year, we actually 2 campuses might actually achieve zero waste certifications. With the utilities of energy, water, and waste, we send out a utility report to all the residences for the students so that they can actually manage themselves and see how much water and energy and waste they actually used for the previous month, and try and reduce that amount of utilities. Back to the element of travel and mobility, that this is a big focus point for us. So we really encourage the students and staff to walk or to cycle or use other forms of transport except for diesel and petrol. So that is a real focus and a push from our side. Also, what we do is we do a lot of surveys, and then we also have introduced circles, which is a program for Holland, which actually try and take single occupancy out of a vehicle and fill up the vehicle. It's quite a nice program, but that's only a test phase on the moment. Then coming to our buildings, so on each new project, we have got an AP. We've got a contract with the APs actually helping us there, just because we haven't got the expertise ourselves. So on this stage, we're actually building all buildings to a minimum of 4-star rated principles. I know that is not good anymore. 5 and 6 stars are the norm lately. We've got 70 buildings that we actually rate the performance of those buildings every month. We've already certified 19 buildings on campus and 1 new build as well. And then we're almost done with our first net zero building on energy. And then really we design our spaces for learning and for research, productivity, as well as well-being, because the people do spend a lot of time in those areas. So if we go to the left-hand corner on top, that is our latest Jan Beton building. It was quite a nice design, and with the landscape, everything intact around it. On the right-hand side on top, that is our research lab on the medical campus. And then at the bottom is our 2 new residences that we've just occupied beginning of the year. Obviously, we actually did rate them just because our buildings are older than 100 years old. And we wanted to know how do they perform against other buildings, and they actually perform quite well. Actually, the older buildings perform better than the new buildings because of better isolation. And that is also a way of rating it against our portfolio, but also against other portfolios, just to get an understanding. And the real reason why we do it is that we actually could use the GBCSA policies and the plans that we have to compile and what we had to upgrade them to the present status. From there, they actually developed green building guides for us, and that is what we actually on the moment presenting to our staff in the buildings and training them so that we can change the behavior and hopefully the utilities will reduce. Inside spaces, so obviously the classrooms are quite big. They can handle anything from a 50-seater right up to 300 seaters. We also, the outside spaces, we make that so that the students can enjoy that and they can actually also learn or study outside as well if it's a nice day. And then obviously on the right hand side on top, that is an atrium between two buildings that we've closed and that the students can also use that. Goods and services, that plays an important role with us. Obviously, we try and bring in FSC, all FSC timber as well as paper on campus. There is some eco standards that we apply. There are still some material that comes into campus that is not recyclable. So we're in the process actually designing that out of campus. Yeah, I'm not going to go any deeper. On our biodiversity side element, we use our whole campus as well as our conservation areas as a living lab. Agri students as well as engineering students are using this for different purposes. We do develop environmental management plans for the areas. We've got 3 rivers that we look at. We've got one lake, and obviously we've got 2 reserves, and then a big quite mountain catchment area that we also, which is part of the campuses that we look at. And it's open for the community, so the community can actually come and enjoy it as well and walk and have events there. Then I think really the focus on the moment is our awareness and communication plans that we've got. So welcoming is that first week when the new students, 5,000 of them comes to campus, where we try and teach them about sustainability and that they actually for the first time that they come into contact with sustainability issues on a bigger scale. Earth Day, we make a big thing out of Earth Day. The students actually, like this year, they've actually had this good walk on campus, which was great. We've got like e-waste drives. We've got a lot of tree planting activities, and then obviously even collaborations with the community outside of campus. And they even go that far that students actually goes to the rugby matches, and there they actually promote sustainability as well. In our office, there's a lady, every year she upgrades this calendar for us. So we actually create an environmental sustainability calendar with themes for every month, but also for events that is taking place and that they can plan for. Tours, a lot of tours happens on campus for staff and students. The team do a lot of solar tours just to introduce it to the students. We take them a lot to the materials recovery facility on the left-hand side corner at the bottom, where they can smell it and they can see where the waste is going and what, we actually take them to a green building and we explain all the facets of a green building to them. Same with the grey water system. We've got quite a big grey water system which feeds all the toilet. It actually captures the water from all the showers, gets filtered through a system, and then actually all that water goes to flushing of the toilets of the residences. NMT routes, we built an NMT route, and we're going to expand that now, where people can walk as well as bicycles and skateboards can use the same surface. Then they've got a lot of other, we take them to the mountain, and there's a lot of other facets to the sustainability of the campus. Training, that's a big part of it. So I think we've got a unique system. We've got interns, 4 interns working in our office with us in the same office. Yeah, and they are students which also teach the other students. Then we've got assistants which is still studying, and they are within the residences helping to promote and drive awareness amongst other students. Then we've got, like we call it, green HQs. They are also in the residences, also helping to get the message out there to students. We have got a training course for a week long with medical students, first year medical students. I've just mentioned that the green building staff, we're actually training them. And then the team is also training all the kitchen staff, all the cleaners, vendors on the campus. So it's quite a big program, and it takes about a year to get through it. Then they've actually implemented the Green Living Awards. So the students of all the residences have got a couple projects that they have to do, and they also their utilities gets evaluated. And in the end of the year, we actually evaluate this, and we actually have got quite a big celebration where we actually celebrate the number 1, 2, and 3 residences that won, but also the rewards. If we do get any rewards from GBCSA, we will have on the same celebration. Right, my last slide, I think. What are the challenges? So there are many challenges. So the first thing is to convince. It took us a long time, and I'm talking about years, to convince our leaders to adapt environmental sustainability into our system. You have to write a lot of memos. You have to have a lot of meetings, and you must keep on with it and not give up. Obviously, budget is always a issue because this is external to our budgets. Luckily, we've got a green fund from where we can loan money as long as we pay it back within 7 years. Manpower, in 2010, it was only myself and another lady that started. Now we're a group of already over 10 people working in the office. And in the beginning, I really battled to get experienced specialists to help us with environmental sustainability in the education space. That was quite an issue, but now there's quite a number of them available, and we still battle with having a good awareness and a behavioral change program in place amongst the 40,000 people on campus. So we're trying every year to improve that, but it's not easy. Ozzy, thank you very much.
Thanks, John. That was very insightful in all the activities that you're doing on campus. Very inspiring as well. Randy, handing over to you.
Right. Yeah. Thank you very much, John, as well. I think now is our time for Q&A. So we'd also ask, I think, Meg to join us again. She's here. And with the audience, we have a Q&A tool that you can use. You can also use the chat, but you could also raise your hand. Any option works for us. So whatever you'd like to do, you're welcome to join in a discussion around the presentations that the 2 speakers have just given us. So we have one. I will hand over to James as a question. Oh,
thank you.
There we go.
Thank you very much, Randy, and thank you to the presenters. I have a quick question about the guide. So it's I'm really eager to get into it and read it, but I do have a question for you, Meg. That does this guide offer insight on how to select an appropriate site for a school within a high-density urban environment? And the reason why I ask is because the programmatic adjacencies around schools, usually in Uganda's urban centers, are somewhat tricky because one has to deal with the lack of neighborhood-wide planning that would support the functioning of the school as part of a wider urban fabric. So I feel like as we discuss sustainability, usually the question of the wider interconnectedness of things is something I try to, I guess, tussle with. So I don't know if there's a section that deals with what's an appropriate site for a school to begin with, because many times you'll find within the urban centers, someone is like, I have a plot. And when you get to the plot, you're like, I don't know if we can actually have a school here. I don't think the things around it would support the proper functioning of it. So yeah.
All right.
Thanks, James. I mean, an excellent question. I think the short answer is no, there isn't an in-depth section looking at placement of schools. It does cover the kind of area that you might want, both in terms of the kind of spatial planning and programming of a school, but also looking at how what the difference between area allowed in an urban school and a rural school might be. So it doesn't really look at adjacencies. I think your question is excellent, and what you've identified is really important. And hopefully that's the kind of thing that architects and policymakers and decision makers will be factoring in when they decide locations for new schools. But we haven't specifically looked at that.
Thank you.
There's a good question in the chat box for John. The question comes from Neil. Have HEFMA norms and standards. I just had to quickly Google what HEFMA is, but it's the Higher Education Facility Management Association, which I'm sure you're aware of. Have they been updated to recognize green design initiatives? From past experience is that it's very outdated, non-inclusive and restrictive set of codes from which tertiary institution work from. Your programs and successes seem to have indicated that Stellies have abandoned these codes.
Yeah, I can maybe answer that. So both higher education as well as HEFMA, they have got a set of codes, but it is really to help all the universities in South Africa to get to a certain standard. Obviously, we have gone above that already, especially with SANS and XA standards. And we've actually now applied our own standards for sustainability on top of that. So we require actually that they do energy models and water models for us so that we can actually build that into the buildings. And the reason for that is because we want to get to net zero somewhere in near 2050. And if we don't do that now with the most efficient buildings, you won't get there.
Great, thank you.
All right.
Randy, do you want to pick a question?
Yeah, I was gonna give unmute Felix Holland to ask a question.
Great. Good evening, everyone, and thank you to the two speakers. Very interesting presentations I found. I have a question for each of you. I've also written them, but it's maybe easier to do that verbally. So for Meg, you sort of highlighted the purpose of the school design guide, and you put that into the context of East Africa and the unbelievable lack of school space right now. I know that Enable, for instance, estimates that there are 8,000 schools in Uganda alone missing right now. And we could compare that with about 300 registered architects in the country. And if you just look at those two figures, then you sort of know that having each of these 8,000 schools designed by an architect is going to be very difficult to achieve. The question and then you also made the point about your vocational school experience, where you actually, I think, were mostly involved in the master planning exercise, maybe also in the conceptual design. I'm not sure, you can explain that, but you also said it was a very, very quick exercise. would you say that one of your primary motivations for the school design guide was sort of an architecture without architects, or somehow to redefine what an architect does in this type of exercise of designing schools? So that's my question to you. And to John, a much shorter question. I mean, it's amazing what Stellenbosch is doing, and how far you have gone with all these programs. There's just one thing that struck me, and that is that biogas doesn't seem to play a role at all. Is that something that you looked at? Is there a particular reason why not, or did I just maybe not spot it in your presentation? Thank you.
Thanks, Felix. Great question, and something that I have thought about a lot. I mean, it certainly, the motivation for doing the guide was to provide schools design guidance when we had identified that there was a lack of it. So there wasn't any kind of motivation to try and create architecture without architects, as it were. I think a conclusion that I came to as I went through the research, bearing in mind the figures that you've quoted about number of schools and classrooms required, number of architects, was that if we really want to scale up the construction of good, sustainably designed bioclimatic schools, then actually possibly the most efficient use of those architects and graduate architects is to have more of a role at the master planning phase and to have more of a pattern book of classrooms. Now, there are lots of potential problems with that, and I'm not suggesting that that's an ideal solution, but I think compared to what's currently the case, which is where essentially the master plan itself is in a pattern book, and doesn't matter where your site is, the same arrangement of buildings pretty well gets built. I think an improvement on that would be architects looking at sites, perhaps being involved in choosing of the site, like in an urban setting, and thinking about topography and resources and access and community engagement, and maybe having a more hands-off approach when it comes to the detailed design. With this particular school, we did the master plan, 3-phase master plan. We did the first, the buildings for the first phase were up to what I would call kind of REBA stage 3. So sort of, we would call it concept level designs, but I mean, I guess detailed concept level designs, not quite construction drawings. Phase 2 were much more conceptual, so kind of floor plans and vague exterior. And then phase 3, we just allocated areas of the site because we thought that by 5 or 6 years' time, the needs would probably have changed. So I think there's a strong case for that, and I would be really interested to explore that idea further, and whether that's something that organisations like Enable or whether universities would be interested as well in thinking about how can you maximise the skills of the architect and also draw in other professions who there might be more of available, such as maybe site engineers or technicians. But I mean, it's a great question, and it's certainly not a perfect solution, but it's just trying to kind of be pragmatic with where we're at the moment.
Great. John, do you still remember the question?
Yes, I do. Yeah, to answer, so I didn't go in depth into that at all in my presentation, but obviously we are busy with a decarbonization plan for the university to take our emissions from what it is down to as close to zero as possible. And part of that plan, we're actually investigating biogas as well as biomass, as well as batteries with a solar system, a ground-mounted solar system. Biogas, we did invest that in the past as well. So obviously we haven't got enough organic waste to make our own biomass for the amount of energy that we use. So we have to buy it in. On the moment in the Western Cape, the one plant that was making biogas, they stopped. 2 new plants started now there, but they're not really in production yet. So biogas is not yet a good solution in the Western Cape. It might become a good solution somewhere in the future, but we don't want to be the guinea pigs. So we're waiting until we actually can see that it's become a viable option. Biomass, we've done quite a big study on that. That is a viable option on the moment. As soon as we have 2 more hikes in the municipal electricity, we will equal the amount that you can buy it per unit or produce it from biomass. Batteries, we know it is costing a lot, but we're looking at investigating batteries on the moment as well. So we're really looking at different alternatives because we know that we need to get away from coal as our main provider of energy.
I was going to hand over to Arnold. Arnold, I think you can unmute to ask your question. You'd like.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yep.
Perfect. My question is it's not really a question, more a thought to Meg with regards to outdoor environments when it gets to schools. I appreciate the idea of functional outdoor environments, but like the correlation between functional outdoor environments, for example, if you have a space outdoors and then you choose to use it for wastewater, black water management, sewage treatment, as opposed to making a space that connects to the indoor-outdoor connection of students or pupils. The idea that play is part of learning, and not just planned play where like you design a football field or a basketball field, but like more like open play where the thing that kind of breeds creativity. So my thought is there a way we can create more not exactly functional outdoor spaces, but more multifunctional outdoor spaces that can serve different purposes, but also that do not kill the desire to go outside for like the children in these spaces? Because I think outdoor environments are very important, in as much as we say our learning is always in the classroom, but there's also a lot of learning that goes on outside the classroom. Yeah, thank you.
Shall I dive in? Thanks, Arnold. Yeah, really important point. And maybe the slide that I shared was a bit misleading because most of the landscape section is all about play and creating a really attractive environment. So we want to include functions like food production and water management, but actually making it really an extension of the classroom and part of the school environment, whether for learning or for play, is extremely important. And I think that's how you get your, I guess, value for money out of working into the landscape is making it work hard. So I think what we would argue is that lots of schools I saw, the external environment was just kind of grass or dust. But we would say actually you can really use the outdoor environment to create a place that children want to go in, where they can play creatively, which might include football, but might include something else as well. And where they can really kind of grow their social skills as well as their educational skills. So I couldn't agree more. And that's the main focus of our landscape section. And I certainly, I mean, in terms of water treatment, I think the landscape can be used for surface water runoff, but I certainly wouldn't want any kind of wastewater treatment happening in the exposed environment. We would want any of that to be below ground, well out of the way of children playing. Hopefully that answers the question.
I think John hinted on it, Meg, that essentially it was interesting that you're focusing more on new schools that are being designed. And there's a question here asking about, I think, what modifications to existing schools. So it would be interesting to know if that's something you have thought about, or with the guide, especially with some of the examples you shared with us that are in quite difficult states. Is it important to this project as well, or is it a completely different something completely different to tackle? And then maybe I'd also ask John on that similar, you mentioned that some of your newer buildings are not as efficient as the older ones. I'm not sure if I misunderstood that, but I'm curious to understand a little bit more about that, and also what you take into consideration, I think, with the architects and designers that you use if you do have new buildings and new projects to ensure that, yeah, they do meet some of these goals that you've described to us. Yeah.
Yes, we thought about existing structures. We haven't provided much guidance on it, partly because, you know, the scope of existing structures is so huge. You could fill probably 3 books just looking at different kind of retrofit options. I think, you know, in terms of embodied carbon, using the structures you have is often better than tearing them down, although it depends a bit what state the structures are in. But I think I'd be asking questions of what are the problems with those existing structures that need to be resolved. So that might be to do with internal comforts. Maybe they're getting overheated or they're too noisy when it rains, there's not enough ventilation. Some of those issues could probably be retrofitted, whether that's kind of replacements to the roof or increasing openings. If it's to do with upgrades to landscape, I mean, that could certainly happen around an existing school. So it really depends on what the school facilities are and where they're at. Some of the case studies do work with schools which have existing buildings and they're perhaps adding to that campus. So in short, I hope that anyone reading the guide would be able to draw out useful principles that could be applied to existing schools, but we certainly haven't provided detailed guidance on that, and I would love to see it if someone else manages to do that. I know that's something that Enable were thinking about how they upgrade existing schools, because there's certainly a lot of valuable work to be done there.
Now, it's a tough question, but I think Marloes can answer that better than myself, but let's give it a try. Yeah, so if you take a building that's 100 years old, which we've got quite a couple of those buildings between 80 and 100-year-old building, their walls are like a meter thick. They've got the ceiling heights are just much more than the new buildings, and the spaces are just much better insulated than the newer buildings. And you've got this big trees around that buildings because the gardens has been established. So you've got a lot of passive cooling in those buildings. Obviously there's less occupants in that building than in the new building, because the new building is mostly open plan offices or open plan designs. So you've got a lot more occupancy in those buildings. So an old building on this stage actually just performs better than our new buildings. So then, and the reason for that is because your new buildings have got a lot of glass in. It's especially the north fronted areas. If you haven't got facades in place, you need a lot of HVAC to cool those areas down. Lately we do put facades in place, but it's expensive to put a facade onto a building. And so how do we do the new buildings? So we pretty much take the GBCSA criteria for new builds. That is what we, as well as for refurbishments. So when we do refurbish a big block of buildings, like we're doing now, the engineering block, which consists of about 7 buildings, we will actually try and implement all your energy models, all your water models, and then we will take out all the HVAC, individual HVAC units, and put centralized systems in place, one system in a complex. So that is how we try and overcome, because on campus, our electricity is really used by our HVAC, about 70%, and a big portion to make hot water on campus for students. That is the big consumers of energy. Lights doesn't use that much. And then the other parts is your plugs on your floors that actually uses a lot of, which is your computers and your screens and stuff like that. So with good architects and good professional team, a mechanical team, civil team, we actually do this design, do the models, so that the new buildings that we put in place are as close to net zero water buildings.
Nothing to add. I think just from you mentioned that most of your older buildings are over 100 years old, and so those buildings have been designed without air conditioning in mind, because there was no air conditioning, whereas we seem to be now relying on air conditioning to create thermal comfort. But it's nice to see that the old architecture worked. I see Hillary's got her hand up. Randy, can you unmute her?
Hello, everyone. Thank you very much for your presentation. A question for Meg concerns with the community aspects of schools, because the idea of schools is quite interesting, and I believe it's a very huge utility for education, especially in East Africa, where the idea of trying to get the community closer to the school, trying to see the advantages, or trying to get people enticed in the idea of school, because it's where it's quite low, would be quite interesting. Though the question is, does the guide propose a framework or a sort of like a simple guide on how looking at community and trying to depict or pick out specific pain points in the community and how the school can respond to that? And I would like to know specifically for the school year designed, how was it like to sort of narrow it down, because there's so many aspects in the community that could be, for example, waste or water. So how did you narrow it down and consolidate the whole program to a specific part? Thank you very much.
Thank you, Hilary. Two great questions. I'll answer the second one first. That with the school that I shared the example of, I mean, the needs of the school were decided by the client, Ignite Change. So, and they were really the ones that were embedded in the community, had been living and working in that area for a long time, and who understood the needs of the community. So they said, these are the spaces that we need, and these are how many people. And our job as architects was to kind of take that and turn it into a school design. So, I mean, I think as architects, we are often very reliant on clients to be that community link point, unless it's a project that we're developing ourselves. That's a role that often the client is best placed to take. In terms of guidance for engaging the communities, there is a bit. It's fairly light touch. You know, a guide like this tries to cover pretty well everything, but not always in a great deal of detail. But there are a couple of spreads about community participation in design and some of the different aspects that needs to be thought of. That spread in itself was taken off the back of a conference that Enable ran about community participation in design, and there is actually a much more detailed guide that was produced off the back of that, which is available from the Enable website, and I can put a link in the chat. So we didn't really want to duplicate that, but we've sort of summarized the key points and point to that wider guide.
Thanks, Meg. So I think maybe let's take one more question, I think, one or two, and slowly start to lead to the conclusion.
There's a quick question around where they can obtain the guide, a physical copy of the school design guide.
In the first instance, at the Innovation Festival tomorrow, hosted by Enable, and beyond that, I would say get in touch with Enable, because they have the copies of the guide printed in Uganda. They've really been the ones that have published this, and I would say look out on the kind of Enable news streams, because they will be talking about where they will be. Once I have more information on that, I will also share it with Localworks, who I'm sure will be keen to see the physical copy. They were very involved and a key partner in its development.
Yes, definitely. And if we find out more, we can also share on the newsletter as soon as we have more information after tomorrow. Yeah, sounds good. Yeah, I think interesting question about local languages, if the importance of, is there potential for that so that it's used by even more people in different contexts? I think it was interesting you touched on different countries potentially having their own variations of the guide, but the adaptation of local languages, is that a possibility and something you've thought about, could think about?
Anyone is welcome to translate the guide into whatever languages they like. I think if we set off down that route, I mean, the number of local languages in East Africa, I haven't counted, but I'm going to guess it's well over 100 and possibly into the thousands. Obviously, you could be more strategic and just pick those that are most widely spoken. I mean, I think across East Africa, certainly in professional spheres, English or French are very widely spoken, and so among sort of design professionals, school leaders, policymakers, and certainly those more senior working in NGOs, it should be fairly accessible. It won't be easy to read for everyone, but actually for some people it might be irrelevant. I often think of that school in southwest Uganda where the head teacher had only been educated to the 4th year of secondary, and I kind of thought, how on earth is school's design guidance ever going to reach here? Maybe it will one day, but I guess it's a kind of a case of trying to be a bit pragmatic. But if anyone would like to translate it, they're very welcome to. And yeah, we'd really welcome that. I mean, I love other languages, and I think they're such a rich and beautiful part of culture. So I'd be the last person to say that it should stick in English and French. It's just, yeah, a matter of pragmatism, really.
Makes a lot of sense.
Great. Randy, can I ask one last question to John?
Yeah.
Great. John, you mentioned a number of challenges that you faced over the last 15 years in like setting up the sustainability at the campus. If you were to pick 3 successes that you've achieved over the last 15 years, what would those 3 key successes be that sort of made your campus incredibly sustainable?
It's going to sound strange, but a good crisis is a good crisis. So it helps a lot. So the water crisis for us, I want to say that was the breakthrough, because they used us to actually decide, do we keep the university's doors open like business as usual, or do we close the doors and send the students home because we haven't got water to supply, which is potable water as well as water for hygienic purposes. And we went the opposite route. So they made money available. We put all these efforts in place, and we made put filtration plants and all of other side of other schemes in place, especially awareness. And the students came up with a lot of initiatives as well to save water, and we saved 50% of the water that we normally use by that exercise. And I think that is where sustainability really made its mark, and from there it actually just started rolling out initiatives on energy and all sides of it. So I think that was a good part of it. The second good thing, I think I did it too late, but I should have involved specialists from outside quite sooner into the sustainability system, that they actually helped us to change the minds of our leadership, and that we actually could use their expertise that they've got, which we did eventually. So I think that was a major change as well, where we actually started to use APs, and they really helped us on our buildings. That really happened now in the last 3 years, that changed around, that we're actually building good buildings on the moment. So that was the second one. And then I think the third one is we have got quite a good team that is driving the awareness and the training of environmental sustainability on the campuses. And I think those 3 things are actually the backbone of our environmental sustainability.
Right. Awesome.
Yeah, really interesting to see what's happening on that campus, I think. Thank you, John. Yeah. So I think we'll close our event now. I think this is the end of it. And if there are further questions, we would encourage you to share them on all our platforms, the 2 of us combined, so that we continue this conversation as always. So thank you, Meg and John, for joining us, for giving us your time and sharing your presentations, and for the attendees for joining us this evening. I think there is another event that's been spoken about earlier that will happen next week, and Regenerative Collaborative will be hosting this. I think, Marlos, you can tell us a little bit more about that. But yeah, we will record this. Sorry, it has already been recorded, but we'll upload this to our YouTube channel so that you can watch later, and try and share as many of the links in here as possible so that everyone has access to the information. But let me hand over to you, Marlos, but thank you from us at Local Talks.
Great. Thanks, Randy. Really awesome to do this collaboratively. Really enjoyed the webinar. Thanks, Meg, and thanks, John, for your presentations. Really insightful. I did share the link to the webinar on the chat for next week's webinar. Please join us there. Would be great to see some similar people there. Also, for those that need CPD points, I shared the link in the chat box as well. So yeah, I think. Thank you for attending. It was a great topic, and I'm really looking forward to hear more in the future. Have a good evening, everyone.
Goodbye.
Thank you, and thanks for the presenters. Great to be with you this evening.
Well done.
Good evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you.